Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is for Mr. Curry. Mr. Curry, as you know, Iowa is in floodplains both between the Mississippi and the Missouri River, the Des Moines River, and the National Flood Insurance Program, which is administered by FEMA, offers insurance policies for homeowners in areas that are prone to flooding. The NFIP has been largely criticized because of communities of color and lower income areas are disproportionately less likely to be covered. Earlier this week, the GAO published a report on the NFIP. Based on the report, how can NFIP be improved?
Well, thank you, ma'am. The issue with the National Flood Insurance Program, there are so many issues to discuss. It's one of the reasons that NFIP has been on GAO's high risk list since a federal program since 2006. And so, I won't get into the issues with the sustainability and the solvency of the program, but as you probably know better than anyone in Iowa, the program is not fiscally solvent. It doesn't take in enough revenue to cover its costs. The premiums and the costs do not reflect actual risk. So there are a number of structural challenges with the program that Congress has worked over the years to try to address. But let me talk about the most recent report we did, and specifically, because what we looked at is the flood maps. And those are extremely critical to this whole process, because what those do is they set up the special hazard flood areas by which FEMA uses to determine who is in those and out and who has to pay for flood insurance and who doesn't, and then what their premiums are. One challenge that has happened is that the special hazard flood area over the years is not reflective of actual risk. Many areas outside of the special flood hazard area now throughout this country flood and cause tremendous amounts of damage. And so the perfect example of that is what happened in West Virginia a few years ago. That was not a special hazard flood area. Those were not on any FEMA flood maps. And so people are flooded, and oftentimes they don't have insurance that'll cover flood. So, one of the things we found is FEMA needs to do a way better job of encountering, future conditions into these flood maps if we're going to have an actual picture of risk to decide where to help people for flooding and what to do in that regard. We also found that FEMA does not target flood mapping resources towards the most vulnerable areas, which has been a problem over the years as well. So, we don't have good information about flood risk in the most vulnerable areas of the country.
Thank you. And do you think that FEMA's risk rating of 2.0 better enables lower income communities to participate in the program, or is it a hurdle?
So I think risk rating 2.0 does a better job because they're trying to get more granular data, so they actually have a good picture of flood risk for that property, a specific property. But this gets into this bigger challenge we've been talking about today. These programs are incredibly complicated and very technical. And so what does that require? That requires state and local governments to have the resources, the local capacity, and the resources to bring on technical experts and consultants. So who's going to have those resources? It's going to be higher income areas and higher income jurisdictions and counties. And so this is just another example of where extremely complicated processes and programs fall harder on more vulnerable jurisdictions because they don't have the same level of capacity and resources.
In the report, it also examined equity challenges at FEMA, HUD, and SBA, and the GAO studied these specific agencies because they all manage federal recovery programs with historically large amounts of disaster-specific obligations. Why is it so important for the to disaster recovery that these agencies work together?
Thank you for asking that question, because I know some of those agencies fall out of the committee's jurisdiction, but for a state or local government agency, it's all federal funding. Even though it's coming from different federal departments, it's just billions of federal dollars coming into play. They all have different rules, requirements, timeframes. And so what we don't want to see is we don't want to see problems fixed in this area in one program and then the other 8 programs that not be fixed, because that's not going to help people at the local level. It's just going to be more complicated. So if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. And we need to look from the top down at all the major disaster recovery programs. And those agencies manage it's hundreds of billions of dollars over the last few years in recovery funding.
So it sounds like the intelligence silos that we had to break down after 9/11, we need to break down some of those silos that are existing in our federal disaster recovery programs.
It is
So,
very true. It is very true, and it's very difficult because it crosses aid departments. They don't, they don't have to work together. They don't have to share data, and it crosses committees of jurisdiction in Congress as well.
thank you so much for that, and thank you, Chairman Thompson.